Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Deliberately Divided, Inside the Controversial Study of Twins and Triplets Adopted Apart, by Nancy L. Segal. Narrated by Margaret Strom. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures and tables present in the print and e-book formats of the book. Preface. Unlike most multiple birth babies, these newborn twins and triplets did not grow up together. In accordance with the policy of a New York adoption service, the members of at least 9 infant twin pairs and a set of triplets grew up apart, raised in different families. Desperate for children, their adoptive mothers and fathers were thrilled to be offered a newborn baby. Only they never knew that they welcomed just part of a twin or triplet set into their home. The mystery surrounding the birth and placement of these children by the agency staff was intentional. A decision they validated by claiming to support the best interests of each child. But the tale does not end there. Because the twins' separate rearing allowed them to be secretly studied by investigators bent on unraveling the effects of nature and nurture on behavioral development. This book tells the story of a twin study that does not go away. This project has been strongly justified and defended by some, but vehemently attacked and opposed by others. I am riveted by the controversy and feel compelled to explore all sides of the nature and consequences of this work. Digging deeper into the purposeful separation of twins and triplets, and what proved to be the covert observation of their growing up years, is the most challenging task I have faced in my career. I say that as a twin researcher and as a fraternal twin. It began in the late 1950s with the notion that twins were better off growing up in separate families, as they would not be competing for parental attention with the same-age sibling. This claim, conceived by Columbia University psychiatrist Dr. Viola Bernard, informed the placement policy of the Louise Wise Adoption Services in New York City. How long this policy remained in place is a matter of some debate, but we know that twins were adopted into different families, and that the development of each identical twin was tracked and compared for 12 years. Parents were never told that they and their children were unwitting subjects in a long-term study of multiple birth children that was launched to settle the nature-nurture debate. The investigators also reasoned that telling the parents about their child's multiple birth status would interfere with the experiment. Fraternal twins were separated as well, but they were not part of the project. The study, known as the Louise Wise Services, LWS, Child Development Center, CDC, Twin Study, was orchestrated by psychoanalyst and psychiatrist Dr. Peter B. Neubauer, beginning in the early 1960s. Neubauer was a clinical professor of psychiatry at New York University and a supervising analyst at the Psychoanalytic Institutes of Columbia and New York universities. He was also a member of the Jewish Board of Guardians, now the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services. Known for his studies of one-child families, the meanings of play, and the effects of television violence on children's dreams, his views were often presented in the media, as well as in the Psychoanalytic Study of the Child, a journal he edited since the 1970s. I did not know of the study's existence until the early 1980s because so much about it was kept secret. It's still news to some of my colleagues and friends, and to many in society who trust professionals to act in their best interests. Information on the infant twins' earliest days prior to placement and the data that were later gathered on them continued to be shrouded in secrecy. Prior to his death in 2008, in 1990, Neubauer's research material was deposited in the Yale University archives to be concealed until 2065. The year 2066 is widely cited, but it is actually on October 18, 2065, that the copyright passes to Yale University, and on October 25, 2065, that the records can be released. The collection includes 66 boxes of material. Some of Neubauer's former associates and others positioned to address the twins' grievances refused to speak on the record. The twins' adoption histories, bequeathed to Spence Chapin Services after LWS closed its doors in 2004, have been difficult, if not impossible, for the twins to obtain. According to many people I spoke with, the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services has placed innumerable barriers between the twins and their study records. Why did I agree to do a book-length treatment of a controversial twin research project conducted over half a century ago? The years 2017 and 2018 saw the release of 2 documentary films related to this study: The Twinning Reaction and 3 Identical Strangers. These films gripped the public to a degree that even the directors and producers had not anticipated. Because purposefully sending multiple birth babies to different homes and recording their behavior undercover challenged belief in the sacredness of family ties and shattered trust in scientific integrity. People everywhere were talking about this study. At anniversary parties and birthday celebrations, I was suddenly the center of attention because of my ongoing twin research. In Southern California, where I live and work, casual conversations at social gatherings were often replaced by dialogue and debate. How could this happen? Guests demanded to know. What more can you tell us? It was no different among my professional colleagues. There's so much more that needs to be written about it. I wondered if you had been consulted. There is a lot more to say about the twins from this study, as well as its origins, methods, challenges, and outcomes that 50 to 90-minute films cannot capture. In the weeks following their release, people insisted that I was the best person to write a book because of my past association with the Minnesota study of twins reared apart, and my more recent work with switched-at-birth twin pairs and young Chinese twins adopted apart. Lori Shinseki, director of The Twinning Reaction, was especially encouraging and offered to make many of her materials available. My boyfriend, philosophy professor Craig K. Ihara, argued that despite its dark side, the study warranted a place in the history of twin research. And when I gave lectures on my various twin research projects, audience members bombarded me with questions and comments about the LWS CDC study. I knew that the twins' stories needed to be told to help them gain information about their past, to help them understand their present, and to prevent such an episode from happening in the future. The twins and their parents have been angry, hurt, and confused since learning that their lives had been so callously tampered with. Ultimately, I did not have to decide to write this book because I knew I was going to do it. In February 2019, editor Suzanne Staszak Silva at Rowman and Littlefield Publishers gave me that chance. As thrilling as it was to be offered a contract when competition for such opportunities was, and is, high, I felt a vague unease about this undertaking, a feeling I had never experienced while writing my previous books on twins. I would be reaching out to Neubauer's former colleagues, who might talk to me defiantly, reluctantly, or not at all. Many of them were defending him, after the film's release, believing Neubauer had been unfairly vilified in the press and on film. The book I would write was clearly not going to satisfy everyone. Television programs, radio interviews, newspaper articles, and internet blogs were teeming with different opinions about the twins' rights to their birth histories, the appropriateness of the Louise Wise adoption policies, and the issue of researcher responsibilities. The book was going to be divisive, and I would be in the crosshairs. Then, a month after signing on with Rowman and Littlefield, I met up with my colleague, Dr. Robert Plomin, a psychologist and geneticist at King's College, London. I was in London to tape a reared-apart twin segment for the BAFTA award-winning television series, Long Lost Family. Plomin and I shared a 3-tiered tray of savories and fancies during high tea at the National Portrait Gallery. It was an opportunity for me to hear his views on the LWS-CDC twin study and 2 recent films and related topics. Plomin is accustomed to controversy. As a leader in the field of behavioral genetics since the early 1970s, he has consistently defended the role of hereditary factors, nature, in shaping human behavior, challenging the long prevailing view that environmental influences, nurture, are paramount. His 2018 book, Blueprint: How DNA Makes Us Who We Are, describes the potential use of polygenic scores, values that combine small genetic effects allowing predictions about each person's intelligence, personality, and disease predispositions. He calls these scores fortune tellers, a claim that has been both strongly embraced and hotly contested. Plomin recalled being consulted for a 1982 60 Minutes expose of the Neubauer study that was ultimately canceled, a curious turn of events I will revisit later in the book. Without asking, I was hoping Plomin would say what I knew already, that this book project was exciting, timely, and important. I was not disappointed, because his enthusiasm and encouragement were immediate. When I hinted at the likely controversies that would erupt once the book was out, he unknowingly settled that point too. Why write a safe book? Write something that people will talk about. I trust and hope I have done exactly that. 1. Illustrious and Ignoble. Twin Studies. Identical twins captivate us like no other pair of humans. Seeing 2 identical infants, children, or adults is irresistible, causing people to peer into baby carriages, stare into playgrounds, and even pose personal questions. Who was born first? Who is smarter? Do you ever switch places? I believe that the universal fascination with twins comes from our appreciation and expectation of individual differences in appearance and behavior. Thus, the sight of 2 people who look and act so much alike challenges these strongly held beliefs. Moreover, most identical twins insist that the love, understanding, and trust that they share with their sibling surpasses that of all other social connections. Their intimacy evokes admiration and envy in most non-twins, but to some it suggests overdependence and confinement. Regardless, we find ourselves intrigued and drawn into twins' lives, trying to understand them. At the same time, scientists study twins for insights into the origins of behavioral and physical traits. There are also dim sides to twin research, studies that have cast a frightening gloom over this popular and well-respected approach to human development. Twins and their families have been physically hurt and emotionally damaged in the process. Fortunately, there are only a few such investigations, but their effects have been far-reaching, provoking public outrage, distrust in research scientists, and disdain for public servants. There is Dr. William Blatz's scientific abuse of the identical Dion quintuplets in Canada, 1937. There is Dr. Joseph Mengele's horrifying twin research conducted at the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp in Poland, 1943 to 1945. There are the tortured medical experiments performed on conjoined twins Masha and Dasha Krivoshlapova in the 1950s by Russian state scientists. And there is Dr. John Money's attempt to turn an accidentally castrated male twin into a female, 1967 to 1980s. These unfortunate studies continue to be examined for the grievous missteps that were made and the important lessons that can be learned. There is another contentious episode in the twin research field that has not disappeared from discussion. It is New York's Louise Wise Services, LWS, Child Development Center, CDC study that tracked the development of separated twins without informing their families about the nature of the investigation. The study began in 1960 and lasted approximately 20 years. It was a collaboration between LWS consultant Dr. Viola W. Bernard and the director of the Jewish Board of Guardians Child Development Center, Dr. Peter B. Neubauer. This book is the inside story about the policy that separated the twins and the study that tracked them. It is also a venture into why their plan was so seductive but disturbing, and why it still concerns us. Their work was an attempt to resolve the relative contributions of nature, genes, and nurture, environments, to the ongoing nature-nurture debate. Nature-nurture debate. Ever since Sir Francis Galton's 1875 twin research persuaded him that nature prevails enormously over nurture, the nature-nurture debate has held the attention of countless people. Everyone wants explanations for why they are average or astute, short or tall, outgoing or shy, risk-taking or cautious. Twin research brings clarity to these questions, explaining why identical and fraternal twins are valued participants in psychological and medical research. Twin studies have also infiltrated fields as diverse as economics, political science, and religious studies, revising their explanatory landscapes to include genetic effects. Twin studies help us understand why we are lavish or frugal, liberal or conservative, pious or profane. The LWS CDC study came at a time when nature-nurture debates were raging worldwide. Most researchers considered nurture or environmental influences to be decisive in shaping the way a child developed. Refrigerator mothers, characterized by high intellect, emotional distance, and inability to defrost, were blamed for the development of autism in their young children. A similar constellation of traits defined schizophrenic parents, whose coldness, rejection, and hostility were thought to cause psychopathology in their children as they approached adulthood. But those times were changing. Genetic findings from non-human animal experiments, twin and adoption studies, and medical research were challenging that wisdom. There was just enough buzz in the air to question the prevailing environmental theories, bringing genetic factors, heredity, into the mix. It was an exciting but contentious time. People could accept that physical traits, such as height and weight, were partly affected by the genes. However, evidence that behavioral traits, especially general intelligence, had a genetic underpinning was hotly debated, with accusations of sexism and racism brought against many who supported that claim. However, individual differences, for example, variation among people of the same gender or ethnicity, are distinct from between-group differences. For example, variation between people of different genders or ethnicities. So it is not possible to draw conclusions about one based on the other. For example, the reasons for differences in rough and tumble play among females in one culture are not always the same as those between females from different cultures. Prenatal exposure to higher levels of testosterone have been linked to higher rates of rough and tumble play among young girls. However, girls from more egalitarian societies are socialized to be more aggressive than girls from more male-dominated societies. Nevertheless, this crucial difference was not always recognized by proponents or opponents of genetic effects. Careers were crushed, and research plans were derailed. Interestingly, 3 of Neubauer's New York medical colleagues, Alexander Thomas, Stella Chess, and Thomas Birch, had been following the development of 141 infants since 1956. In 1970, they published their conclusion, chiding physicians who had lost sight of what every mother knows, namely, that each child shows a characteristic temperamental style from birth. They found no consistent or predictable relation between the parent's treatment and the child's specific symptoms. For example, a domineering parent might appear to make one child anxious and another child defiant. Left out of the equation was the child's own temperament, that is, his own individual style of responding to the environment. Never once did Thomas and company mention the words heredity, genetic, or genes, but their meaning was clear. Separated twins are the perfect way to test ideas like these. Neubauer and Bernard knew this and seized an opportunity that came their way, or some might say that they created. Why twins? The logic of the twin research method is clever and elegant, yet amazingly straightforward and simple. It rests on the presence of 2 types of twins, identical and fraternal. Identical, monozygotic, or MZ twins, result when a single fertilized egg, or zygote, divides between 1 and 14 days after conception to create 2. Further division of one or both of those zygotes results in identical triplets and quadruplets, known as higher-order identical multiples. Consequently, identical twins and these multiple multiples share all their genes in common, and all members of these sets are either male or female. Fraternal, dizygotic, or DZ twins occur when a woman simultaneously releases 2 eggs that are fertilized by 2 separate spermatozoa. These twins share half their genes on average, which is exactly the same genetic relationship shared by non-twin brothers and sisters born years apart. Fraternal twins can be either same-sex or opposite sex. The release and fertilization of more than 2 eggs at a time yields fraternal triplets, quadruplets, or more. It is also possible to have mixed sets, such as a trio composed of an identical pair with a fraternal co-triplet. The classic twin method involves comparing similarities between pairs of identical twins and pairs of fraternal twins. If identical twin partners, or co-twins, are more alike than fraternal twins in any measured trait, such as visual skill, running speed, or back pain, the conclusion is that genetic factors affect the development of that trait. Environmental influences also play a role because, although identical twins are more alike than any other pair of people, they do not show perfect resemblance. A 2015 survey of twin studies showed that nearly 50% of the individual differences among people across numerous traits are explained by their genetic differences. If environmental factors were not important, that figure would approach 100%. Twinning rates. Twinning rates in the United States rose dramatically in recent years, from 18.9 per thousand births in 1980 to 33.3 twins per thousand births in 2017. This upswing, which mostly involved fraternal twins, was largely explained by the increased use of fertility procedures, such as in vitro fertilization, IVF. IVF involves the creation of multiple embryos in a reproductive laboratory and their implantation in the womb. Fraternal twinning is also more common among older mothers, beginning at about age 35. Because some women were delaying their childbearing years to complete an education or pursue a career, their lifestyle decisions further amplified fraternal twinning rates. These trends have been observed in other Western nations. However, the 2019 rate declined to 32.1 twins per thousand births. This may reflect improved reproductive techniques involving implantation of just one fertilized egg. Identical twins were also becoming more common, but to a lesser extent. Surprisingly, IVF has also been linked to identical twinning, in that manipulating a fertilized egg outside the body may cause it to divide. In fact, identical twinning rates after reproductive treatment are between 2 and 12 times higher than the natural identical twinning rate of 0.3 to 0.4%. Improved detection and management of multiple pregnancies also explain why more identical twins were being born than ever before. However, twinning rates change with the times. The newest report shows a 4% decline in U.S. twinning rates, starting in 2014 and lasting until 2018. The revised figures of 32.6 and 32.1 twins per thousand births are the lowest since 2002. These updated figures make sense if we look at women over age 30, but especially at women over age 40, whose fall-offs are greatest. Older prospective mothers are more likely to seek reproductive assistance, for example IVF, than younger mothers, making multiple conceptions more likely. However, given recent improvements in reproductive technologies, fertility specialists are now able to limit the number of implanted embryos to just one with high success rates. This was less true in the past, when several embryos were required for favorable outcomes. Twins raised apart and together. More convincing and more dramatic than twins raised together are the rare twins who have been separated at birth and raised by different families. The scientific significance of these pairs is that they provide a pure estimate of genetic influence, because the twins did not share their parents, schools, friends, or communities. There have been several major studies of reared-apart twins conducted at the University of Chicago, 1937, the University of Odense, Denmark, 1965 and 1980, the Maudsley Institute, London, 1966, the Karolinska Institute, Stockholm, Sweden, 1984 and 1992, and the University of Minnesota, 2012. Other reared-apart twin studies have taken place or are ongoing in Finland, China, Japan, and the United States. The Minnesota study of twins reared apart, directed by Dr. Thomas J. Bouchard, Jr., was the most exciting professional opportunity I have ever enjoyed in my career. The week-long assessment of each separated set was filled with tests measuring the twins' mental skills, personality traits, medical characteristics, and more, all of which matched more closely among the reared-apart identical than fraternal pairs. It was also stunning to see the unusual similarities.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?